Hi guys, so the other time we started with the digestive system and we majorly introduced the digestive system speaking about its functions. Most importantly, to know that it has three major functions, breaking down the food. So, when the food is in large molecules, the digestion allows it to be in smaller molecules, which makes it easy for the blood to absorb these molecules and distribute them to the rest of the cells. Then the second function was absorbing the nutrients. Like we said, the reason we do the whole process of digestion is because the cells of the body need this food, and these nutrients are very useful for the cells to carry out with all the functions that they need to accomplish. And the third one is releasing waste. And we are familiar that after eating, usually, we all get the urge to use the bathroom. It's because basically the food that doesn't get digested needs to be released, and it's released in a form of solid waste that we call feces or poop or whatever you guys want to call it. Then we moved on to talking about the pathway followed by the food. And we said that doesn't include all the digestive system organs, it includes only the organs in which the food goes in. It starts with the mouth. We consume the food through the mouth. The food is going to be going down through the esophagus in order to get to the stomach. And then from the stomach, it's going to move on to the small intestine, then the large intestine, and then whatever doesn't get digested is going to be eliminated by the anus. And here we just need to note that the rectum is the last part of the large intestine. We talked also about two types of digestion that are the physical or mechanical and chemical. We said that the physical consists of just making the food into smaller pieces, no changing of the nature. The chemical digestion is actually changing the nature or the composition of the food. So now what we need to know is what are all the organs of the digestive system, not only the pathway, not only the digestive tube in which the food goes through. We need to know the other organs that actually do not let the food enter, however they contribute in digestion and they are part of the digestive system. And we also need to know in which organs we are going to see a mechanical digestion and in which organ we're going to see chemical digestion, and in which organs we're going to see both digestions. So if we move on to the next slide right here, we're going to see that the mouth is definitely the first organ of the digestive system, as well it is an organ where food goes inside. Mouth, we're gonna see mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. The mechanical digestion is happening with the action of the teeth, and the chemical digestion is happening with the action of the saliva. What does that mean exactly? Basically, when I'm eating my food and I chew my food with my teeth, the teeth, what are they doing? They're grinding the food as if I'm just cutting the food into smaller pieces. They are like a saw or like scissors or like knives. They're just piecing this food into smaller pieces. For that reason, this is a physical digestion done by the teeth. All right, these are your teeth. As for the saliva that you have in your mouth, the saliva is produced by salivary glands, by glands that we find in the back of the throat, okay? And these glands, they're going to produce the saliva, which is the liquid that we have in the mouth. And this saliva contains chemical molecules that I call enzymes. And these enzymes, what they do is they come and they change the nature of the food. Not only they make it into smaller pieces, but they break it down into different molecules. So let's say I start with a starch molecule, I'm going to get in the end sugar molecules. They are not the same molecule, they are not the same nature. For that reason, in the mouth, we could say that we're going to see both types of digestion, a mechanical or physical digestion that is done by the teeth when they grind and piece the food into smaller pieces, and a chemical digestion that actually is done by the saliva and the enzymes inside the saliva, and it basically acts on molecules of starch. Starch in Arabic is nasha, and foods that are rich in starch are like potatoes, pastas, bread, all of these foods are considered to be starchy foods, okay? And it converts the starch into sugar. It's very important to pay attention to this part. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about the esophagus. The esophagus is technically a very important organ, yet it really doesn't contribute in the digestion. So it has a specific job. What is the job of the esophagus? The job of the esophagus is to bring down the food from the mouth to the stomach. Okay, so it's just a passage. If we want to know more about the esophagus, it's a muscular tube, which basically we know it's when we talk about organs made out of muscles, we're talking about smooth muscles connecting the mouth to the stomach. It's very important to know that. It's about 25 centimeter long, which is not short. Technically, if you think of a 30 centimeter ruler that you use at school, it's like a bit shorter than that. So it's technically kind of a long tube. There is no physical or chemical digestion occurring in the esophagus. So the esophagus does not do any digestive function, any digestive role. It just takes the food. It transports the food from the mouth to the stomach. Connect the mouth to the stomach. Pay attention to that part. However, here in this picture, they show you that if this is the mouth right here, this is the esophagus. You see it? All right. Right by the esophagus here, I have a flap called the epiglottis, which we talked about in the respiratory system. And we said that this structure right here is very important because what it does, it closes over the respiratory tube every time you swallow to prevent you from choking. So why does the food always go into the esophagus and not go into the trachea, although we know that they are both two tubes and they're kind of very close to each other? So, and air and food, both of them come from the mouth. So how does the air go into the trachea and the food goes into the esophagus? It's because of this structure called the epiglottis, because what it does, it closes the air pathway when food is coming down. So this way the food doesn't come into the trachea and we don't choke. And actually sometimes accidents happen and the epiglottis is a bit late to cover the trachea. And what happens in that case, you know what? This is when you guys start choking. And we say in Arabic, charda. This is what charda is. It's basically when the food, by mistake, goes into the trachea. And in order to relieve it, what happens is you have to let the food out of the trachea. And this is why usually after this choking happens, the food comes out of the mouth again. All right? So it's very important to know the role of the epiglottis. So although it's a very, very small structure, we've talked about it before in the respiratory system, and we bring it back again into the digestive system to know that it plays a major role in letting air take its pathway into the trachea and let the food take its pathway into the esophagus. We now get into the stomach because we know the role of the esophagus is technically to bring down the food from the mouth to the stomach. So now the food is in the stomach. If you look at the stomach, it's a G-shaped. They consider it G because it looks like the letter G if you look at it. Right? And it digests food physically and chemically. So the stomach does two types of digestion. Can you guys think how does it do mechanical or physical digestion? Well, what did they say? They said it's a muscular organ. Muscular organ means it's made out of smooth muscles. And muscles, what do? They contract and relax, contract and relax. And the contraction and the relaxation of the muscle is a physical activity. So when this muscle inside the stomach keeps contracting and relaxing, what does it do to the food? It's also digesting it, but physically it makes it also into smaller pieces. It kind of becomes juicy because how much this contraction and relaxation is going to piece it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. As for the chemical digestion, it's actually ensured by the hydrochloric acid that is secreted by the walls of the stomach. So this is the stomach right here. The walls, the edges, all right, the edges secrete an acid called the hydrochloric acid that is rich in enzymes, which are molecules, chemical molecules or chemical structures, all right? And what they do, these enzymes, they're going to digest the food chemically. And mostly, the stomach likes to act on proteins, and it's gonna turn the proteins into amino acids. And here you see that it's definitely a chemical digestion because it's changing the nature of the food. We start with proteins, we're going to end up with amino acids. They are different molecules. Therefore, there is a chemical digestion occurring on top of the physical digestion that is happening because of the relaxation and the contraction of the smooth muscle inside the stomach. Remember that this hydrochloric acid not only activates substances that digest proteins, so not only plays a role into digestion, it also kills microbes. Even now, guys, during coronavirus, they're telling you, there are studies that show that if basically the coronavirus was still in the mouth area and you actually drank lots of fluid and the virus ends up going into the digestive tube instead of the respiratory tube, which means it's going to go into esophagus, stomach instead of going into trachea, lungs. What happens is once it gets to the stomach with the acidity of it is capable of killing it. All right, so this acid is actually very, 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 very strong, and not only it contains enzymes that are in charge of doing chemical digestion of proteins, but also it plays a role in defending the body against pathogens, microbes and viruses and bacteria and all this kind of stuff. Now that the food is out of the stomach, it's going to reach to the small intestine. The small intestine is right here. The small intestine is very tricky. You know why? Because it's actually very thin. It has a small diameter. So if I look at it, or if I think of it like a hose, you know, the hose, the nabrish that you use to water your plants in the garden, all right? What happens is it has a very small diameter. So it's a very tiny hose, like a tiny hose, but it's the longest part. It could reach about 6 meters long. Like the tallest person in the world is what, like 2 meters and 20 centimeters? But can you believe inside of his body, he has a tube, or he has an organ that is 8 meters long, but 6 meters long, I'm sorry. But the reason it fits, it's because look how it is. It's like on top of each other. You know, it's not just like laid completely like in a long, relaxed way. No, it's basically like wrapped on each other. And what's so important about it also is where the digestion is completed. So technically the digestion, whether it's physical or chemical or whatever it is, ends in the small intestine. So this is where the absorption of nutrients is going to happen. So inside the small intestines, it's where the blood is gonna come and collect the nutrients to distribute them to the rest of the cell. So now you guys are gonna tell me, so if the digestion ends in the small intestine, what is the point of the large intestines? It's very important, guys, and let me tell you why. The reason the large intestine is very important because first, it's where water is mainly absorbed. So although the nutrients are absorbed inside the small intestine, the water is absorbed in the large intestines. Not only that, there is a bacteria in the large intestine that is providing us with some vitamins like the vitamins K and B that are also needed by the cells of the body. And the food that is not digested and that we need to eliminate from the body is going to get eliminated through the large intestine. It's going to get into the rectum, and then the opening of the large intestine, which is the anus, it's going to get eliminated by the anus. If you look at the next slide, you're going to see that. But let me just remind you that we call it large intestine because it has a large diameter. As you could see, it's larger, it's thicker than the small intestine. Here you look at this slide, it shows you that the rectum, which is the last part of the large intestine, the rectum, okay, this is where the solid waste is stored. It's stored in the rectum. So you see, this is the food that is not digested. It's going to keep accumulating until it becomes feces that are stored in the rectum. And once we need to use the bathroom, we say there is defecation occurring, and the anus is going to let this feces out. Now, remember we said that the large intestine, it plays a role in absorbing water. And now you need to remember that if a lot of water is absorbed, we're going to have... So like I said, the large intestine plays a major role in absorbing water. So when this large intestine is going to absorb a lot of water, okay, what's going to happen? These feces are going to be very dry because the large intestine took a lot of water out of them. So we will suffer from constipation. We will have a hard time using the bathroom. And when we are using the bathroom, we're going to feel so much pain to release these feces. As for when the large intestines doesn't get the time to absorb enough water, this water is going to get eliminated with the feces. And this way we're going to have diarrhea. Okay, this is why you're going to use the bathroom a lot and the stool is going to look very watery. All right, it's very important to know that about the large intestines. Now back to the small intestines, because we talked about how they are very important, because at the level of the small intestines, the absorption of nutrients happen. And we need to know why the small intestine. So why did the absorption happen in the small intestine, not in any other organ in the digestive system? Is because if we look at the inside of the large intestine right here, we see like those fine lines that look like fingers. If we try to see them on the microscope, look how they look like. They do look like your fingers of your hands. And these structures, we call them the villi, all right? The singular of them is one villus. A lot of them is villi. And what's so important about the villi is they are very tiny. So that means there is a large number of these villi on the inside of the small intestine. And we know that from other systems, that when we have an exchange surface, like for example, when we talked about the exchange of respiratory gases between the lungs and the blood, we said that the alveoli do the exchange. Why? Because the alveoli are very tiny, very small, and they cover a very big surface. It's the same for villi. Not only that, they have a very thin and permeable layer or cover, all right, or membrane. And this is why around them there's a lot of blood vessels, a lot of capillaries, which will allow the absorption of the nutrients. Now, the inside walls of the small intestine then contain the finger-like structure that we called villi. There's a lot of them. Look how around them we have vein, arteries, we have lots of blood vessels. The villi will help to increase the rate at which nutrients are absorbed. So the more villi are working, the faster the absorption is happening, because we know the larger the exchange surface is, the better and the faster the exchange happens and the absorption happens. Now we're going to move on to the organs that actually play a role in the digestion, and they are parts of the digestive system. However, the food doesn't enter inside of them. They release substances that help with the digestion without even allowing food to go inside of them. These two organs that I'm going to talk about are the liver and the pancreas. Okay, let's see what about the liver. The liver is the largest internal body organ. So it's not only the largest organ of the digestive system, it's the largest internal body organ. It is located on the right side of your body. If I look at it in a picture, it's going to look like it's on the left. But we all know when we are talking in biology, we're trying to turn our back to the picture and see how the liver is going to be to the right and the stomach is actually to the left. So what the liver does, yes, it doesn't allow food to go in, but it's going to release to produce a yellowish greenish fluid that we call the bile. And this bile is actually contains also substances that allow to digest fats, especially fats, all right? And this part of the liver that we call gallbladder stores the bile, all right? And whenever we need that bile, the bile will be poured into the small intestine to digest the fats. And lastly, we have the pancreas. The pancreas also is an organ that is a part of the digestive system. However, the food doesn't go inside the pancreas because the pancreas will produce pancreatic juice. The pancreatic juice will break down proteins and starch, and it actually lowers the acidity in the small intestine. The small intestines are not acidic like the stomach is. So basically what we need to know majorly about the pancreas and the liver, they are two organs of the digestive system that we call also, especially the pancreas, we call it a gland, that they don't allow food to enter inside of them. However, they release juices. The liver is releasing bile, and the pancreas is releasing pancreatic juice, and these two juices will be poured into the small intestine. The bile will be in charge of digesting fats, and the pancreatic juice will be in charge of digesting proteins, okay? And just remember that the bile, when it's produced and it's not needed by like the small intestine to accomplish digestion, it is stored in a very small sac by the liver right here that we call the gallbladder. We need to know one more thing here is that the bile and the pancreatic juice, they pour in the small intestine, well, the duodenum of the small intestine, but you really don't need to know that a part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. Just know that they are both poured in the small intestine. And we need to be familiar with something that we call peristalsis, because we talked about the esophagus and we said, oh, the esophagus doesn't play a major role in digestion. Actually, it does not do any role of digestion. However, it brings down the food from the mouth to the stomach. How does this happen if the esophagus is just a muscular tube? It happens via peristalsis, which basically what happens is the muscles that are inside the esophagus, that are smooth muscle, they contract and relax, contract and relax. As this muscle is contracting and relaxing, what is it doing? It's moving the food down. So this is what peristalsis is. Peristalsis doesn't only occur in the esophagus because it's a long tube. It occurs also in the small intestines because the small intestines are 6 meters long. So how is the food gonna keep going down the small intestine and then get absorbed, and whatever doesn't get digested is gonna move into the large intestine? Also by the same process called peristalsis, because the small intestine is very rich in smooth muscles. And lastly, just you need to know that chemical digestion is mentioned in green on this picture, and the mechanical digestion is mentioned in pink. As you can see, the pink parts where you see the chewing in the mouth right here. Okay, you see the stomach right here where the muscle is actually contracting and relaxing, causing physical or mechanical digestion, and also a bit in the small intestine with the smooth muscles, but it's very not important. We focused mainly on the chewing in the mouth and the chewing in the stomach. As when we talk about chemical digestion, you could see that in the mouth we have some by the salivary glands, we have some also in the stomach, we have in the small intestine a lot of chemical digestion occurring, because don't forget you have the pancreatic juice and the bile getting poured into the small intestine to accomplish digestion. And it's very important to know that for us, absorption of the nutrients is happening inside the small intestine, as the absorption of water is happening inside the large intestine. And I remind you that when little absorption of water happens, we're going to have diarrhea, because that water that is not absorbed is going to get released with the stool. And when lots of water is getting absorbed, the feces are going to be very dry, which is going to cause constipation. So basically, this was our lesson for today. It's to let you guys be familiar with all the organs of the digestive system, to know what happens in each one of these organs. You're gonna need to go over this video, you're gonna need to read and understand your notes, and to do the assignment also, which is an application worksheet. And of course, we're gonna have a session to explain further this lesson and go over all the concepts that we have learned. Don't forget, if you need anything, you can always ask me. Stay safe and take care.